year. We have a great and creative virtual conference this year. We aren't all together for 1 week, but we will be together one day every week. And so we'll be, using the Zoom platform. Our thanks absolutely go to Mark Romney and Will Germain, who have chaired this conference and employed every bit of creativity and leadership that we would have expected them to do. So our thanks to both of you gentlemen. I hope you've gotten your Snack Shack boxes. If you are not in your office, they probably were delivered there. And so if you haven't gotten it, make sure that you make a trip to your office, and inside are all kinds of things, and I won't even spoil it for those of you who haven't seen them yet, but you want to get by your office for sure. I want to also remind you that each week we will be gathering for lunch prior to the session, and there'll be a Grubhub coupon that you will get that day so that you can order lunch. And we want to give our thanks to this week's lunch from Grubhub that was sponsored by Wexford Science and Technology. Thank you very much, Wexford, for that. My lunch is delicious, and I didn't have to make it. So that was a great thing. Let's see, also, for those of you who signed up for the virtual half marathon, I hope that you are logging your miles. And you can do that through the Google link that has been sent out to you. Make sure that you log your miles. I'm not going to feel bad about beating the pants off of you people, but I also would not, hate it if somebody beat me. So make sure you're logging your miles. Listen to those playlists that have been shared with you for a little bit of fun inspiration as you are walking or running. And Martha, I wanted to let you know, if you have not opened one of the playlists, there is some Bee Gees for you. So I listened to your requests there. Let's see. I think that about has us for the beginnings here of our session. I am going to hand it now over to Will Germain, who is chairing this week's session, and to kick us off with our speakers.
Awesome. Thank you, Leah. Appreciate the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And this panel, we hope to be very interactive. So please don't hesitate to throw questions in the chat box, and we'll try to get to them as we see them, and then give you an opportunity to kind of interact live with some of the guests. So in this session, this is kind of really a back to the basics on the real estate of our parks, and so we hope to discuss and tackle some of the changing dynamics that we're facing at our parks. Obviously, the pandemic has shifted the way we look at physical space and gathering space at our campuses, and at the same time, we're trying to maintain that community and stakeholder engagement while trying to meet and serve the needs of our university partners. And so we put together what we think is a very kind of inclusive panel to help really guide us through some of these considerations as well as others. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some of the university-based ecosystems that we've kind of outlined in a couple of slides here. They're in various stages of their maturity, and then we will go into breakout sessions and breakout teams, and I think we're going to be in the same teams that we were on just earlier, and there are facilitators kind of assigned to help guide us through some questions and discussions. Then we will regroup and basically kind of report out and share what we kind of discussed in our smaller groups. So with that said, we can get started with some panelist introductions, and I will maybe start with you, John, and then we'll kind of go go Ted, Paul, and then Doug.
Thanks, Will. I'm Jonathan Bates, Executive Director of the University of Utah's Research, and looking forward to sharing with you guys our recent strategic vision update.
And I'm Ted Hyman. I'm a partner with ZGF Architects, and I'm going to be talking with Paul and Doug about a series of projects that really are the story about taking the transition from an office park to an innovation hub.
And I'm Paul Garvey. I've been integrally involved with the U-City Square since before it was known as U-City Square. It was known as the Science Center, and we'll talk a little bit about incorporating residential and other uses within it. And not everyone wants to live in a science center. So, Doug?
Hi, everybody. I'm Doug Woodruff. I'm Senior Vice President with Wexford and run our West region, based here in good old Phoenix, Arizona, actually Scottsdale, but it's a beautiful day here and we miss you all. So we'll look forward to having you back next year. And a little later on today, I'm also going to share with you a short 5-minute video of our newest building at the Phoenix Biomedical Campus. And hopefully next year, we'll look forward to hosting, Vicki, an event in our new building there. So looking forward to having you all for that. That's our building, Will, you and me. So.
Thank you, Doug. And then I forgot to introduce myself. Will Germain, Senior Investment Officer with Ventas. I lead our investments in research, innovation, and life sciences. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to John, who is going to take us through kind of our first discussion. And as I mentioned, please do send your questions as they come up in the chat, and we will kind of we will discuss them live. So please do that, John.
Great, thank you. First of all, I want to just say I can't wait to get off of Zoom and welcome you all in person to Salt Lake City this October. So hopefully you all are making plans and getting ready for that trip, and you'll see firsthand what I'm going to share with you on these slides. Some of the excitement that we've been working on for the last almost 3 years, candidly, for a strategic vision refresh for a 50-year-old park. So again, what we focused on when we started this adventure was creating a next generation innovation district. And just another quick comment, I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly. A challenge for me on Zoom is paying attention to when comments come in. So just ask those questions through the chat. I'll try to pay attention. I think Will also try to interrupt me and let me know when there's one to address. But let's make this a dialogue, a discussion. Definitely here to answer any questions or respond to any comments. So our research is 320 acres directly adjacent and contiguous to our main campus here in Salt Lake City, Utah. As you can see from that aerial view, we have a significant amount of asphalt parking lots. So about 32% or 100 acres of asphalt parking lots today. And then 38% of underutilized open space, driven by a 30% landscaping requirement in our current protective covenants that individual developers have really chosen to place your typical lawn or sod solution to that. Both of those are opportunities for development, for really improving the interaction and activation of our park. So when we went through this process, we really focused on 3 design lenses that we'll talk about quickly. One, we're inspired by our environment. I mean, we're located on the foothills of the Wasatch Mountain Range. We've got that open space, natural environment at our back door. We also want to acknowledge and continue to embrace the mission that we were founded to strive towards, which is economic development, that innovation ecosystem. And then one you, one community. How do we break down those silos, both programmatically and in the physical environment, to make Research Park blend more into the fabric of the local community, both on campus and regionally? So quickly about our environment. And you guys will all be able to take a hike through those foothills here in October. So get those flights arranged. So one important component of the strategic vision that we focused on was outdoor spaces. This was something that really we focused on even stronger as we went through the pandemic and pivoted from in-person stakeholder meetings to Zoom meetings. We realized the importance of activating, programming, and intentionally designing these outdoor spaces. The social spine was one component of that in the core of our research park, in the town center, if you will, creating a very walkable, very well landscaped with a natural stream that currently dumps into a storm water system. We want to bring that above ground, make it an on-site stormwater treatment facility, as well as an amenity that welcomes people into the space. Just some of the case studies we looked at as we tried to think about how that space could be treated. The grain spine runs, it intersects with the social spine and embraces the natural grades of our environment. It's really the central park, if you will, of Research Park. It creates a recreational pathway, an active use pathway for bikes, peds, and other modes of transportation. And then also provides native landscaping opportunities for outdoor classrooms, outdoor spaces for convening. Again, a couple of examples that we looked at. Well, go ahead.
John, we have a question. So just back on your slide there, how are you funding the common area amenities?
Wow, we went right to the money quick, didn't we? In Utah, we have what are called money trees that grow out back. But candidly, we've been working a lot on filling those funding gaps and coming up with opportunities for how we fund some of these outdoor common area spaces, both by local assessment potential with our existing ground lessee tenants, but also working with our municipality on a potential community reinvestment area and some TIF district dollars that they'd like to see invested in improving these connection points to the broader community, as well as addressing some of the transit and transportation infrastructure issues that we have. And also we acknowledge that the park and the administration, we're also going to have to come to the table with some funding for these common area amenities as well. And then our Red Butte Creek. Red Butte Creek is a natural water feature coming out of the foothills that we have historically turned the backside of our developments to. We want to embrace it as the amenity that it deserves to be, creating opportunities for trails and really created research opportunities, stream overlooks, engagement at this outdoor space. Here's some examples of existing case studies we looked at. And then here's a conceptual, go ahead, Will.
Quick question. So are you using any, is this kind of solely driven by the university, or are there any kind of developers involved in this project and kind of helping you think through it? Just curious what kind of third party or outside involvement you've had.
So we have engaged with quite a broad array of stakeholders, and being a 50-year-old park, we have existing developer partners that we already have in Research Park. And to do this pivot or this update to our master plan and our protective covenants, we're going to need 2/3 of those existing ground lessees to embrace and approve and adopt this vision. And so they've been very critical in the conversation. We're already working with several of those developers on how they want to renegotiate their ground leases to embrace the concepts that you see here and move forward with some redevelopments as soon as we get those prescriptive elements of the plan adopted. We've also had conversations locally with the municipality, our adjacent community councils, our adjacent neighbors, as well as local and national developers that aren't in the space today, to bounce these concepts off of them and get their feedback. And thus far, there seems to be quite a strong level of excitement about what we're trying to create here. So this is just another conceptual illustration of that nexus of the social spine and the green spine and the Red Butte Creek in the core of Research Park, where we're envisioning our convergence hall. My office is actually in this low slung building here that will be adjacent to the main mobility hub. The Marriott Hotel, you'll see when we visit in October, is an existing hospitality product that we have. But this really becomes the core centrally activated space of our research park. And this is a conceptual rendering of that green spine looking north to that bridge over the Red Butte Creek. Again, you can see functional activated landscaping, lifelong learning, outdoor classrooms, and a broader use of land uses, embracing the housing component, et cetera. So again, we've really shaped Utah's innovation economy. We're currently a life science and health science heavy park. We recently did a study of life and health science jobs in our region. And we actually, it actually suggested that 85 to 95% of existing jobs in our region in the life science or health science industry can trace their roots back to the University of Utah and even to our research park. So we're critical to that industry. We're an important player, and we need to position ourselves for some additional growth so that we can continue to be a foundational support for growth in that industry. And one of the big plays we're making with Research Park is the inclusion of that residential component.
Hey, John, one just follow up on the lab and life science. Do you guys have shared lab or, co-working space? I know one of the challenges that, we see is, the earlier stage startup, the users, difficult for them to, take down large chunks of spaces, given how expensive the build outs are of, a core kind of life science facility. What are you guys seeing or doing on your campus, of anything?
Great question. Historically, we did not have a wet lab incubator or a wet lab co-working solution. That was something we identified a couple of years ago as a low-hanging fruit that we should strive for. We actually opened our first wet lab incubator during the pandemic in partnership with Recursion Pharmaceuticals, who is actually Salt Lake City's most recent unicorn out of the University of Utah, a very successful pharmaceutical company. They partnered with us on some space that they vacated as they grew, and we actually converted it into what's called Altitude Labs, which is our co-working wet lab incubator solution today. Now, we know it's not going to meet all of our demand. In fact, it is right now running at 85% capacity. Again, it opened a year ago when the pandemic started, and it's already 80% full. So as we're thinking about additional developments in Research Park, that co-working solution, both from an office as well as a wet lab standpoint, is where we want to put a lot of energy and focus.
Great. And John, we have another question. I believe this one is, so this development seems to be very dense in terms of the footprint and overall gross square feet. Can you talk about that a little bit? And I think this was Abigail, if I'm not mistaken, and feel free to jump in and interact if there are any follow-ups.
So great question. Actually, density is one of the things we're striving for. Density helps us with that activation, those collisions. And so we're working to strive for additional density. I think when you visit the park and you see the existing conditions today, we're not that dense. We're made up of 3, maybe 4-story buildings, significant setbacks, a lot of asphalt parking lots. But the future we want to drive towards is more density, more street activation, more of a 24/7 complete community. again, it comes back to those intentional and unintentional collisions, that bumpability, as Stephen has pushed that terminology forward. It's used a lot here locally now, but that bumpability factor is increased exponentially if you can get a denser level of development. And so in addition to that, the full capacity study, we really took a deep dive and looked critically at what the next 10 years of development hold. And you can see we're forecasting about 18% increase in developed square footage, and that increase in residential units. So today we have 322 student apartments that we're going to scrape, and then we plan to incrementally add 500 units to get us to that 822 units within the next 10 years. And candidly, based on the level of interest and some of proposals we're already working on, I think we'll hit these benchmarks within 5 years. The market's really, really excited about what we're proposing here. Another conceptual rendering of that social spine, looking east to the foothills, that great natural environment that we call home. And then the 1U1 community aspect, breaking down those silos. Really the focus of these slides is the transit improvements. To support the density we're forecasting, to get our adjacent communities to embrace that additional density, we have to address the traffic and transportation issues that we have today, and that additional growth will compound. So it's really creating equitable solutions or access to all modes of transportation.
Hey, Jonathan, we have a couple more questions that came in. It's not in particular order, but first is, what's up here? Was it happened a little bit earlier, but how are you addressing kind of affordable housing for your students and faculty on your campus? If anything, is that part of the plan, and what's kind of happening there?
So great question. I may have took the slides out that pertain to that, but equitable solutions and equitable access to housing for our workforce is critically important to us. Utah's feeling the pressures that a lot of other municipalities are around housing and access to affordable housing, and housing is also seen as a tool we can use to address some of the transportation and traffic mitigation. Our current protective covenants that we've got drafted and we're moving forward with on reviews is suggesting that 25% of new residential units must meet an affordability index. We're suggesting 7% of units are at 50% of AMI, and then 18% are at 80% of AMI or below. So we're definitely committed to an affordability aspect. We think it's critical to what we're doing. And so we're pushing forward with that. The other question was about what happens to the old 300 student apartments. Will new 500 apartments be targeted at professional audience? Is there a housing relationship with the university? So our focus for housing in Research Park is not students. We would like to see some level of graduate students take advantage of these, but we are working on other opportunities on our campus that will be focused entirely on our student population. The housing that we're focused on in Research Park is targeted to force in Research Park, and the protections are restricting it that way. So we will restrict access to those units to employees of the university or employees of the workforce or the industry partners that call Research Park home. And the affordability housing targets are into perpetuity. They're not targeted to just the first generation. So this,
Yeah, are you,
I'm
just
sorry.
to follow up, are you getting any pushback from your development partners?
Of course we are. I mean, affordability cuts into the margin, but are they embracing the vision and the benefits of the affordability aspect? Yes, we've got to work through how that pencils. And we realize that we've got to also invest in that reality. So we're willing to negotiate some reduction in the ground rent charges. We're also working our Salt Lake City RDA on other ways that they can help support and incentivize the affordability.
Great. And Jonathan, one follow-up that question that I think we skipped, it was a direct one. But I think, when we looked at the current campus, there's obviously, it looks like there's a lot of surface parking, and you're obviously going to be densifying, this project quite a bit. How are you, dealing with parking and the cost of parking and all that?
So great question. Parking today in Research Park is free, but you walk across or you cross Red Butte Creek onto our campus, and there's a charge for parking. So there's already this level of inequity in our approach to parking between our entire university campus, and our protective covenants are working to resolve that. So one component of the parking is we want to implement, and our protective covenants are doing it, Transportation Management Association, to give a more unified voice to all of our constituents in Research Park around transportation and transit programs and improvements. And then we're also mandating that there is a charge for parking. And then we are implementing some pretty aggressive minimums and maximums around parking stall quantities that I have a slide here in a minute that will give a little more detail there. So this slide that's been up for a little bit just shows the connective network that we're working on. The blue line is our campus circuit that we envision as a high frequency circulator to our campuses, both our health science and hospital campus, as well as our main campus. And then you see a potential tracks or light rail extension that we've actually been getting excitement of our regional transit authorities about coming into a large mobility hub. That large mobility hub, in addition to being served by light rail, would be the focal point for service from our regional bus rapid transit solutions coming off of our main Foothill Drive through a transit-only access point. And then we're increasing the number of intersections and street right-of-ways in the park, breaking up some of those super blocks that we have, making the environment more inviting for pedestrians and bikes. I'm going to go through these really quickly, but auto trips and mitigating future trip generation, that's huge for
Before you jump in, we have another follow-up question from Katie. Are the entities in the wet lab incubator connected to or come from the university, or are they from across Utah and from other places across the country that have come to this incubator because of what it offers? So
right.
If you can...
Great question. So again, historically, the University of Utah and our research park has been homegrown companies out of the university. 90+% of our current industry partners in Research Park represent that reality. They're homegrown companies out of university IP. A big push for the wet lab incubator, our altitude labs, was actually starting to focus on attracting more national type startups. And so we opened the door, and we have been marketing access to national firms out of the Bay Area, out of the East Coast, that want to take advantage or come into our market and our lower costs of operation. And so really Altitude Labs has been leading us out and trying to diversify our occupancy in that regard. So again, just trip generation mitigation was a big issue for us in our dialogue with our adjacent neighborhoods. We did a lot of data analysis on how building compactly has the potential to mitigate up to 12% of future and current trips. Also, the big transit improvements, the light rail extension, the better and more accessible bus rapid transit, those really help to increase mode share. Today, we are 99% single occupant vehicle served. So really, we want to improve the accessibility and the reality of alternative modes of getting to and from Research Park. We've been working with our Regional Transit Authority or planner, WFRC. The plan to the left shows how all their future planning really bypassed our park on Foothill and then entered into our campus. Our plans, which they're excited about and they're starting to embrace, really show us pulling that service up into the core of the park, making it much more accessible to a broader number of those stakeholders. And then we also looked at our university shuttle system, working to take advantage of that campus circuit, those mobility hubs, so that we're there to distribute ridership off of those regional service providers from that main mobility throughout the park and throughout the campus. And then parking, I know parking is always a fun topic for all of us, but we right now with that sea of asphalt parking lots, each of them dedicated to individual buildings, we wanted to look at ways that we could reduce the supply or the need for parking by a more community-based approach. Strategically locating community-based parking decks along that campus circuit, moving to a park once policy, really lowering the number of stalls and the costs associated with creating those parking solutions. And combined, all of these programs, all of these initiatives have the potential to mitigate 35% of trips into the future. And then here's a rendering of that convergence hall, that main mobility hub, the airpin connector. This is that campus circuit. And then quickly, I just have a 2 or 3 minute video to share with you that kind of wraps it all up.
Next station, University of Utah campus.
right, and I think there were a few questions about the link to the video. There's the link to the video there on my screen. I'll also copy and paste it into the chat. And then someone asked if I could recognition to who was involved with the master plan. I figured everybody would think it was a one-man show and I did it all myself. But that was, I really have to give a shout out to Stephen Colston and his Perkins and Will team and Mason Allstock and the HR&A team. They have been fantastic partners for this. They've been great to work with. I consider them great friends now, and they really have developed a fantastic vision that incorporates a lot of feedback from our community and from our stakeholders. And so again, I wouldn't do this presentation right if I didn't again encourage you to come out to Salt Lake City, see firsthand some of the things we're working on, take a walk through the park, and get off of these Zoom meetings and back to in person.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it. Great video. And we're going to move on to the next kind of phase of the discussion. I think, Ted, do you have, can you pull up the slide?
Yep, I can pull it up. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Are you seeing the right? Okay.
I think we're seeing the aerial.
Right. Okay. We're good. Okay. So I'll go ahead and start. What we thought we would do, rather than just showing you one project, is really show you kind of the evolution of what we've been working on in a number of projects. And so Doug and Paul, I think, just weigh in when you want to, and we'll start. This is Philadelphia. Obviously, Philadelphia is up in the corner here, the Schuylkill River. This area here is really home to both Penn, Drexel, and Children's Hospital, and then the Science Center is right here. And
yeah. You want me to? So
yeah, go ahead, Paul.
So go back to the one slide, the previous slide. So just in context, through the center of this, the green space is Penn's campus. You see Franklin Field there. To the south, the larger buildings are our health campus, both the Penn Health System, University of Pennsylvania Health System, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, both premier institutions, research institutions. There are other handful of research institutions sort of sprinkled into here. On the left-hand side of this, you'll see the Wharton School building, Cohn-Pedersen Fox building there. And then our campus, U City Square, sort of starts from where Ted's cursor is, extending east down to where Drexel campus starts, which between there and the train station, which is an Amtrak station and a regional rail line. So our campus, flip to the next one. So this is a segment of our campus, and if you thought Utah was dense, so right now we are at about a just under 30 acres or so total land mass, so less than 10%, and about the same size, meaning the built environment's about 3.5 million square feet. We have another in excess of 1 million square feet under construction now. And in the cutout, you can see sort of 2010, where most of our buildings were low scale. They didn't include any residential. And so for the past 10 years, we focused on creating density of occupancy in our park, which we think is absolutely critical. Proximity is a key, a critical element for innovation, collaboration, and creating this innovation community. So you'll, Ted, anything on this you want to? So yeah, so so if you on the before side, go to the one before that, Ted. So you'll see a giant sort of rectangular building at the top in the cutout, which is a former University City, circa 1964 high school, which was less than 10% occupied, that the city of Philadelphia, the school district, took out of commission, and Wexford Ventas, in collaboration with Drexel, took down this 10 acres and reintroduced the urban street grid into this portion of U City Square, which is what we're looking at now. So I think that was it.
So we started, I think Paul and I are probably one of the first two people that worked with Wexford. We started about 15 years ago on these buildings that are in purple, 3711, 3737, and 3675, which were really set up as a link back to those institutions. And then as Paul is saying, this area behind it is U City, which is the new development. I just want to walk through kind of how we got there. And so the first building, this is 3711, was really, what you're really seeing is ground floor retail, 4 floors of parking that the city required us to kind of cover up so that it didn't look like you put a parking structure, and then 4 floors of incubator space. And at the time, collaboration was, putting really nice furniture in the lobby, and then having, I think the incubator space is actually on the 8th floor of the building. And so I'm, that's where we started. Paul, if you have anything else you want to say about this?
Yeah, the version 1 that on that 8th floor was what we call the version 1 of our quorum, which was supposedly a community meeting place, an innovators clubhouse. We have had a number of terms for it over the years, but it was up on the 8th floor, was creating that sort of context of collaboration area. So go ahead.
So 3737, which is actually connected, the parking garage from 3711 actually tucks in under the edge of that building. We put in, there's actually 2 lobbies, in the building, one for Penn Medicine, one for the rest of the building. And it started to create a little bit of space for people. Fortunately for Wexford, unfortunately in terms of innovation, Penn Medicine took the entire building virtually. And so, that was where we were at the time. And then the next building is, I think, what started to get really pretty interesting. And this is 3675. You're seeing in the bottom corner is the lobby of the building. Rather than having a security, desk, there's a person sitting at a table. There's a coffee area to get coffee, and then it's interaction space as a lobby, and then there's stairs up to the 2nd floor where that innovation hub is. So it's very easy. The connection now is visually there's a connection right there. But the cool thing is not having a big guard station and having a place where people just walk in and can get a cup of coffee is pretty incredible.
Yeah, and Ted, I think what's really interesting about this from our perspective at Wexford is this is happening in a dense, very urban market where these spaces don't exist, whether it be in a building or even at the university level. It's because it's so broken up. And what we've seen is it started to be a convening area, not only for faculty, not only for private companies, but students and others as well.
Yeah. And I think we had a question, how much lab space is available in the complex? And I don't know if we have any lab space available anymore. I think we've leased all the lab space that was available. I think we're pretty much either 98 or 99% occupied. But I believe that 3675, if I'm not mistaken, Doug, was roughly 60-40 kind of lab office.
Yeah, it's about 60-40, and we were able to bring in biolabs to provide small lab space, which has been gobbled up overnight. Our next building, which is under development, will have a roughly equivalent mix, and we're seeing that the lab space really is it never reaches the market. We'll be fully leased on the lab space in our next building before we finish construction.
Yeah, so the new buildings are set up as Doug was saying, 60/40, and the rest of the campus, it's less than that. So we're converting certain spaces in certain buildings that when we get them back, and then we do have the capability to convert to lab. There's just an insatiable demand for lab spaces. We've done spec labs in 3711, and they were gobbled up, and we've leased them now 2 or 3 times over with zero downtime. So very, very exciting on the lab space.
Yeah, I was asking because I'm coming from a biotech pharmaceutical background, and when we built a building in Tucson, it was about 80% lab, 20% office.
Mhm.
And we never filled the building to capacity for other reasons, but that seemed as an adequate ratio.
So one of the,
Just to maybe just a follow up. Obviously 3675 was kind of designed with, collaboration and kind of connectivity and interaction, ability to kind of interact in mind. Obviously last year, COVID hit, no surprise. Can you talk a little about, Ted or Doug, how that has kind of impacted the building, what has changed, and things that kind of you guys have done differently, kind of pre-post COVID?
go ahead.
Well, we're really not in post-COVID yet, so we're figuring some of that out. Yeah, we saw a real, a significant drop in active tenants in the building, in some of our co-working spaces, in some of our individual non-lab tenant spaces. It's starting to come back. I think our point of view of going forward is 3 kind of points. Probably less co-working and more small independent offices. I think the safe and healthy building components are going to be really important. So one of the nice things about most lab buildings is they have much better air exchange than a traditional commercial building. So that has its benefits, whether you're in the commercial space or in the lab space. And thirdly, I think, that what we're seeing is that as new tenants come along, they do want demised space, but they still want this ability to be out in active open areas, believing that, there's still going to be a need for collaboration and collision. Paul, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that, but.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Ted, if you click to the next slide, I think here. So not only do we have those spaces which create those serendipitous meetings of people, so like that ground floor lobby space, you'll go in there, to grab a cup of coffee, and then you'll see someone that you've been meaning to talk to, sitting at one of the tables, and you'll go over and have a conversation with them, and that happens all the time. But we have a number of other, formalized programs that create these connections and what was the buzzword someone had before in bumpability. Yeah, bumpability. So Venture Cafe in the bottom left here is one of those bumpability. Every Thursday night, even today, they're doing it virtually. We host 200 to 400 people on a couple of those floors in the building and run programs. And it's a curated happy hour come office hours. If there's an attorney who's donating a half hour of time so you can go and have a conversation with them. There are programs, just pure social. We're taking an art tour this afternoon of a Pacific Northwest artist at the end of the evening. And then when we actually come together, we have a beer and a glass of wine in these events. Firsthand is another element, a programmed element that our stakeholders are putting on. And this is STEM education supplement for middle and high schoolers from the neighborhood, from West Philadelphia. And it's staffed by our tenants. So you have a life science company or a research company, they say, yes, that we want to have our people do good in the community, and they'll volunteer an hour of their time a week, or a couple hours of time a week to facilitate this STEM experience, where we've built out a lab in the building on the fourth floor for kids in the community. And then Quorum is that big conferencing center that we have. We encourage a lot of use for it. And then we talked about biolabs and CIC, Cambridge Innovation Center, as a key element of creating a community, more than just co-working, more than just a flex office. They interspace everybody. They do run programs. They participate in Venture Cafe. And it's not only the physical space to create those bumpabilities, but to create programming aspects that push people together, either from a social aspect, from a lunch and learn aspect, and things like that.
Yeah, and I'd just add the Venture Cafe program, which is, obviously, as you mentioned, Paul, it's kind of the traditional big Thursday night gathering that they've put on for a very long time. What I noticed was they, during or in the middle of the pandemic, they kind of transitioned that to a virtual section, and I was quite surprised by the number of virtual kind of attendees that they were able to have at that program, which now they're able to kind of take that same community and kind of bringing them back to the physical space and back to physical interaction, which was nice, and kind of keeping that community together when it wasn't possible or feasible during or in the middle of the pandemic. So.
An interesting side note, Will, is that some of the meetings that we've had, we get more participation from non-Philadelphia people. So people from Boston, people from Raleigh-Durham area, oh, that's a program I'd like to listen in on, and they're participating. So it's really enlarging the community beyond the geographic boundaries that we're sort of worked in. I need to get there on a Thursday night. Here I can just click in because I'm 30 miles away, or I don't feel like coming from Princeton to Philadelphia or Boston. Yeah.
And a quick question came in from Brian. Can you talk a little bit about biolabs at CIC? Or anyone could jump in on that.
Doug, you want to take it, or you want me to handle it?
Sorry, go, Paul. You take it first. I'll chime in.
Okay. Yeah. So when we came out of the ground with 3675, we set up a relationship with CIC, and they did not have really the experience in operating biolabs. So they basically set up an arrangement with biolabs to operate a portion of the CIC floors. And these labs are scattered throughout those floors. And again, a conscious decision to create interactions between the community that's within CIC. And so it's fully staffed and manned, operated by biolabs, meaning the lab services, the procurements. It's you have to qualify to get into it, and they have either small isolated labs of 5 or 6 benches, up to 10 or 15 benches, and then we have sort of shared labs, which might be a suite of 40 or 50 benches, where these companies can rent by the bench top. And I would strongly encourage, if you can get a shared lab operator that's of a quality like biolabs and CIC in your park, it's absolutely phenomenal. It helps, as Will alluded to, the easy ramp into space or before you can build out. We brought Amicus Therapeutics into 3675 from the Princeton area. And before they could get up and running in their labs that they were building to their specifications, which was a 9 or 12 month delay, they started their R&D within the biolabs and the CIC portion for the office portion.
Yeah, Paul, I think you're right. And beyond Philly, and Philly benefited from the density that was already there and the ability to identify CIC and biolabs as somebody who would come in there because there was such a robust opportunity. One of the things I think we're seeing across all of our Wexford markets is the scale of this has to meet with the market. And with the changing of that scale, finding those operators becomes either more difficult or easier. So I actually think over the next year to 2 years, because of the catapulting of bio and life sciences to the front of the economic development path, that we're going to see more entrance into that market, which I think is a good thing, because what may work in Philly may not work, for instance, in Champaign, Urbana-Champaign, or in just to go back to Salt Lake, in Salt Lake. And I think in the industry, we got to find others who can support this kind of work to make it grow faster.
To your point, Doug, we have biolabs in a project in California where they're taking I think it's a 20,000 square foot floor plate in a research building for Lundquist Institute, which is a nonprofit associated with County UCLA. And they are leasing a shelf in a freezer. They're leasing a single 6-foot bench in a lab, or you can lease, I mean, at the smallest scale, you can lease, shared write-up space and access to a conference room. And so you can be a very small operation, because they're pretty far from any of the universities, at a teeny scale, all the way up to kind of that 3,000 square foot lab in the same building.
Mm-hmm.
Should we keep going?
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's move. Let's keep moving.
Okay. So we wanted, this is the new project. This is, behind those buildings that were really set up to create a gateway for this larger campus. And, the move to invite the community into 3675 is now flipping, and it's really creating a community in an innovation district. And I like the term intellectual collisions, but rather than bumping, because they're a little, they're a little more interesting. But this is really becoming the linkage between the institutions, the city, and the community. It's bringing in a residential neighborhood to the north, into this development. It's creating a plaza and people spaces. And I think the idea, the transition from where we were on Market Street to here, bringing real retail and creating pedestrian activities, creating this pedestrian linkage into the development, and really creating a community beyond just a bunch of research buildings is really exciting. Paul, the building, you can weigh in more. The building probably has a vivarium we're talking about in the project. There's office spaces, there's potentially CGMP facilities, which I don't know if anybody else has experienced this, but in the last 6 to 9 months, the one thing we're hearing from almost every client we have is, how do we convert everything from lab space to office space to CGMP space? Because everybody's thinking about what's going to be, what the future is going to look like post-COVID in terms of producing vaccines for everything else that's going to hit us. And then this academic, there's an academic tower for Drexel, a K through 12 school, and then housing.
Yeah. Hey, a quick question came in. What entity will be managing the programming and activation of the plaza? Good question.
Yeah, so we have a special services district in the area, and we've relied on them to provide services. And part of this goes back to the other question about sort of the funding side. We've added a funding source within our leases to create a sort of a community fund to pay for these services. But that's how we intend to work through that. Either our partner, be it the Science Center or the University City District, which is the Special Services District, that will end up, having to help them get the manpower, through some money to make that work.
One of the things, I mean, the contrast to Utah is actually pretty interesting. The density is, when we get back here, starts to get pretty big. And the idea to U City, which is this building, on the right side, is really set up with these series of terraces that create an opportunity for tenants that are coming in to have their kind of own outdoor space and own identity, in these very large buildings. And so it's thinking about how do you retain some of that, some of what we had before in these much denser buildings now. And the idea of getting some outdoor spaces and double height spaces where tenants on multiple floors can interact is going to be really important in these new buildings as the density gets bigger. So, Paul, you can talk about this one.
Yeah. So one of the important things is the connection between our commercial tenants, and we have an awful lot of them, and our university partners, if you may. So in that prior building, 3675, we leased 2 floors of that building to Drexel's College of Computing and Informatics. And students in a professional lab and office building is sort of like a traditional developer would be afraid of having students in their office building, but quite frankly, it really works. The activity in the quorum spaces and the access to the undergraduate and graduate level talent in IT and informatics for these life sciences companies is very important. So that was the first phase, and then the next phase was this Drexel Academic Tower, which is Drexel School of Nursing program, which is directly behind 3675, and that's one of the 40% of that million square feet that we have, over a million square feet that we have, probably 30% of that over a million square feet that we have under construction right now. And then the other element here is another building that Ted pointed to a little bit on the master plan, is a K-8 school. So to the north of this campus is a community called Powelton Village, which was a combination of workforce housing circa 1870s to supply workmen to the railroads and the transportation hubs and some of the smokestack industries that were along the Schuylkill River, and also beautiful 6,000-foot 3-story Victorian homes that had fallen into sort of a less than ideal condition. And this community had sort of dipped down a little bit in the economic, socioeconomic classes, and education was failing. One of the important things to our stakeholders, one of our stakeholders, Drexel, was a revamped K-8 school to increase the elementary education here in the community. So Ventas was a economic supporter for this school in this master plan. So it creates, bringing this community into this urban research campus. And it's just a very important part of our community outreach and improving the quality of life and the educational opportunities for our neighbors.
Yeah, Paul, I would just add, we've found this to be really a critical element for community engagement and opening up the mysteries of science at a very local level. We have a similar program here in Phoenix where there's a Phoenix Public Charter School that's focused on, it's called the Phoenix Biomedical High School. And we're finding opportunities to bring, it's a high school program, but 99 or 85% of the kids who are enrolled come from low and moderate income households. About 90% of the kids are are brown and black ethnicities. And we're really getting an opportunity to open up what goes on in life science and bioscience to these kids through internships. There's tours on a regular basis. We're finding this to be a really great added amenity into a number of our what we call our knowledge communities.
So the answer to the question, it is a public school. And it's a sort of joint sponsorship with Drexel. And there was a prior lesson learned when John Fry, the president of Drexel, was at the University of Pennsylvania. They did this with Penn's Graduate School of Education, took another public school, basically took it over and supported it economically with teaching assistants, with new technologies, just really improving the education quality in the public school system. So it is a public school, yes.
So now we're gonna leapfrog from Pennsylvania to Northern California for a minute. This is a new project we're doing together with Wexford and UC Davis. Mark Romney, who's on also, I think this is his baby. And it's probably one of, as an architect working for developers, that doesn't always, get you really excited. This project is probably one of the most exciting projects. I have a whole staff that want to be on this because of the social impacts in addition to just cool buildings. It's pretty amazing. So it's at the UC Davis campus. This is in Sacramento. So the medical school is just at the top of that photograph up there, and then the new campus, Aggie Square, is down here. These 4 buildings, and it's really bringing together the School of Medicine, elements of the School of Agriculture, the School of Education, and then in addition to that, there's some student housing, there's catering, there's a catering for the UC Davis health system, with the exception of the hospital is here, and probably one of the most exciting things for us is, and probably about half the people on this call are old enough to remember who Alice Waters is, but she opened Chez Panisse Restaurant in the 60s, and it was the first farm to fork restaurant in the country. It's still probably one of the hardest restaurants to get a reservation in Berkeley at, but their foundation is really it's this edible education. They're looking at how do you bring healthy food to K through 12 schools, to children in public schools, and partnering, and moving her institute here gives this place kind of this huge social impact that, is really pretty exciting. So this is Doug's baby, so I should let Doug.
Well, it's really Mark's baby. I'm just a nurse right now to help him. I should start by, and Mark may have shared this with the group in previous meetings, but it really was an intentional effort on the part of UC Davis to really leverage what has been, the strongest health sciences research in Northern California, and a hospital that serves the largest catchment area in all of California, and bring with it the ability to double research, and at the same time go from being primarily a base research focus to translational and commercialization. And we've been doing this through the last year of a pandemic, which has been really interesting, but we've made monumental strides in a state like California, where it's really hard to develop. And the one thing I wanted to point out here, because I think this is an evolving component of what we're all going to see going forward, and the university, UC Davis, has really leaned into this, and that is that we're not just creating buildings and a park-like setting. We're really led by Mark and his colleagues, making sure that what we build here is beneficial to the surrounding communities. There are 3 low to moderate income communities immediately to the west and south of this project, as well as other stable communities that have always had some friction with the university about growth and development. And literally this week, we signed a 3-party agreement with the city of Sacramento, UC Davis, and Wexford for a.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We'd like to ask.
Oh, somebody's getting on an airplane. I'm impressed. So we signed this community, or we agreed to this community benefits structure that's going to give local hiring an opportunity for the neighborhoods around there, opportunities for youth engagement, and open up many of these buildings for people in the surrounding communities to come in and use, kind of like what you saw in Philadelphia, where we have open and active space. They'll be able to come in and be a part of it. So I think this is indicative of where things are going to be headed in the future. I think inclusive approaches to innovation and the confluence of academia with commercialization and the community is a natural. And I think we'll see a lot more of it as things open back up and we go forward. Now to the specifics of the building. I'll turn a little of this back over to Ted and join in when I need to.
Yeah, and Ted, just a quick time check. We probably want to move through these next slides quickly so we can jump into the breakout sessions.
Okay.
You can take your time on this section. It's okay. Sorry.
You're going to point Mark's office is going to be in the top right-hand corner of that glass building.
Part of it, I mean, in addition, Doug, one of the things that we thought a lot about is how do you create, I mean, there's a mobility plaza, there's actually, and you see, to give kudos to Mark, the campus is moving all their buses to green energy, the big bus stop for between the two campuses and around the town will be over here. So creating this mobility plaza that really connects with transit. And Mark, you can weigh in too on this because this is your baby. But then the kinds of spaces that go on the ground floor are really intended to activate that paseo and the square. And we're hoping we get, Alice Waters wants to have some form of farmer's market out in front of the building that can be used, during the week for people that are in a food desert, but then also as a traditional farmer's market. All kinds of really incredible opportunities here. And then as you move up to the second floor, the Innovation Center this is the lifelong learning building. So there's continuing education program from UC Davis that's here, or adult education. There's this Innovation Center, which then spills out into this lab building back here. So these effectively are two separate buildings, but they're connected on this floor. So that Innovation Center just spills through between the two. And then Alice Waters and then student housing. This is what it's going to look like approaching the buildings from the transit hub and from the med school. And then I'll just end with this because this is a really interesting project we're starting. This is just outside of Boston, and it's kind of the antithesis of what we were typically having to deal with. This is a place that has the best restaurant in Boston, has the best brewery in Boston, has a chocolate factory that's collaborating with the restaurant and the brewery to make chocolate. And one of my favorite things there is you eat the chocolate, it goes down into your stomach, it reacts with your stomach acid somehow, and out comes IPA smell out of your chest. So they're doing all this really interesting research with food. There's Brooklyn Boulders here, there's a community there. And rather than doing a building that's connected to the community, they're actually inviting the community, into the buildings. And so this is the ground floor, and this is very early, but the idea of these spaces on the ground floor that are everything from space for research, we're calling it the sandbox to use, but also a place that the community come in. They have a partnership with the high school and junior high for robotics programs. They also have an autonomous car company potentially in the building. So how you allow those kinds of programs all to happen in this space. And then the commuter rail is just on the south, and there's conversations about opening that up and creating a stop here that the public will actually walk through the middle of these two buildings to get to town. So it really becomes a public space. And so this is the lobby of that space. The commuter rail is up here, and this just becomes a big space for everything from rolling out new products to farmers markets. And it's really a kind of a quasi-public space. And so, this is one that has all the elements you want to have. And now all we got to do is attract the tenants that want to, be in the building. So, I went as fast as I can.
Okay, great. And we're going to jump into breakout sessions really quick. There was one question on Aggie Square about the city's involvement and working with the city and the departments. Doug, this was a complex deal, so don't spend too much time.
I won't. I'll do 2 minutes.
There's a lot.
2 minute answer. 2 minute answer, and it'll be you guys will understand this. So, University of California doesn't pay taxes. So the fact that we're building on their campus opened up the opportunity to bring commercial tenants in, and there'd be a new tax base for the city. They like that, but we needed some help in lifting up some of the costs that were for making this happen. So what they agreed to do was to create a community benefits program that took 20% of the taxes raised and put it toward affordable housing, which is a really big priority for the city at the time. And then they would take 80% of the taxes we generated and help us build some of the infrastructure that was needed. So I think that was under 2 minutes, Will, but it was about a 6.5 to 7 month negotiating process with all three parties. And I think the university, in my mind, they step further than I've seen most other universities go in terms of that kind of partnership.
Great. Thank you, Doug. So we're going to move quickly into breakout sessions. We have 15 minutes. You'll have facilitators, and they have the questions that are going to be asked and discussed, and then we will regroup and hear kind of what everybody discussed, and we'll move to close. So Diana or Vicky, can you push us to our breakout screen? Hopefully everyone had some time to get through the questions. I might have been a little bit short, might not have enough time for some, but hopefully we got through enough content. So what we'd like to do is just kind of go around, and we can probably start. I'm just going based off of the list I have in front of me with the Cubs, and then we can kind of move on, I think, to the Rockies after that, and we'll kind of go so on and so forth. So, and hopefully everybody knows what team they were on. I'm not sure if everybody knows, but hopefully everybody knows. So, Cubs team, do you want to talk about what was discussed in your group?
Wait, is Cubbies? Is Cubs the same as Cubbies?
Cubs. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was like, I thought they were doing that. Okay, yeah, that's me. So I think we had a great conversation. For brevity, because there are lots of groups, I would say the most interesting takeaway was that obviously, unsurprisingly, the trend is going towards not being full time, and so wanting to sort of have some days on campus, but sort of how would you deal with the burst days? So on the one hand, we probably would need less parking overall and a kind of less space, but then you would have burst days. So how do you deal with that? So I thought it was really interesting, and if anyone else has thought about it and how to solve for that, that would be great. We also had a conversation about the wet labs obviously being in quite high demand right now, but not every space is right for it. They're also very expensive to build. And so, other than wet lab space, and seeing that people don't need as much offices, what's behind magic door number 3? So what are the other options, and what are companies looking for other than those? So again, if anyone has answers, that would be very interesting. So I think that's the key takeaway. And if anyone else from the Cubs/Cubbies, if I left something out, let me know.
Yeah, I would add, I think Greg had a good point about kind of in terms of what's potentially going to change, and the culture kind of going forward is going to change kind of as we move kind of away from COVID and towards kind of the new reality of how we're doing things. But Greg, I don't know if you want to jump in there.
I think the main thing I was thinking about, and we've been thinking about a lot in our team, is that in this new mode where you don't have people that are in on that regular, almost everyday basis as we have in the past, how do you be deliberate then? And as was just said, the burst days where everyone wants to maybe try to be deliberate. What are the things that we're going to create to add value to our own internal culture for our teams, but also to the building and the other tenants in the area? So that's something that we're spending a lot of time thinking about, and how we want to create a rhythm to those things so you can plan around it. So if you knew on every other Wednesday something's going to be happening that you want to be part of, maybe you build your schedule around that and make sure that you're in during that particular window of time. But it comes with its challenges, because it's like a hotel. I used the example, it's like a hotel on homecoming weekend. There's never enough rooms. But if you could spread out the demand over time, you don't need as much space, except that we're trying to be deliberate about people coming in. So what we'll do with that, we'll use a lot of our open areas. We'll use our plazas, our patios, and things of that nature, so that we can densify that, have more people together. But we probably can't accommodate fully everyone's work surface needs during the midst of that. We have all given up offices, though, for what it's worth. Unless you're going to have your backside in a seat in an office every single day, you don't have one anymore. So life's going to change for everybody, and that's kind of an interesting and exciting change.
That's good.
Awesome. And move to the next group, so we keep moving. The Rockies, you're up next.
Okay. This is Stephen. And I think I've been nominated to speak on behalf of the group, but hopefully they'll respond back. We had University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, University of Utah, New Mexico State Universities, San Diego State University, and myself. Our questions were around current real estate strategies and addressing the future market needs, and what we might actually be seeing in terms of the future needs of the park and how they tie back to the community. And I think Jonathan was like, yes, definitely. That was an obvious, and I think everybody just saw that.
You're frozen, Stephen.
Oh, thanks, Steve. Stephen's frozen. Someone from the Orioles.
I saw him blinking, so I think he was just frozen in thought. But I saw him blinking again. There we go.
You're good. You're good now, Stephen.
Oh wow! I warned everybody earlier. Yesterday, my internet started becoming really unstable. Sorry.
That's all right. You're okay now.
Okay. So so Jonathan was saying, obviously engaging with the community was important, and Laura was saying their 2018 plan had involved community input, but it was all too often, I think this was the case in Salt Lake City too, sometimes the city is doing planning but not taking the research park into its considerations and addressing those disconnects, which is unfortunate, because the research park is so much the bridge to the community. So for them, it's not just about planning the park, but it's also thinking about it in the context and the benefits that you don't necessarily sometimes have to build in amenities and resources that you can be within a couple of blocks walk to. And I think Hala from San Diego State University, who is just at the very front end of sort of framing their new innovation district, said kind of same thing. Lots of very big focus on the community engagement, both internally and externally, thinking about trails from their site all the way to the ocean, thinking about how it ties together with the regional trolley connections, and also thinking about how some of the breakdown of the districts within the innovation district is connecting with their stadium developments and the residential developments, and all becoming quite interactive, even though looking at different kind of financing models for each of those. Everybody pretty much, other question was about rethinking the master plan for next buildings. And, I think part of this is sort of reshaping questions about what's going on, pandemic, post-pandemic. Illinois had mentioned that they're just trying to, their plan, I guess, was done in 2018. So they're really trying to use that as a framework. And one of the good byproducts of that has been an encouraging of new density, setting good guideposts down as it relates to those, but that they're intending to use that framework to be adaptable and flexible to the market. They currently are in the process of the developer RFP process, so I can't talk very much about that. But I think that's a really key aspect for them to have those guiding principles shaping some of the development patterns by being market responsive. San Diego said, you know, they feel they've got a plan that is kind of accommodatable and expect modifications over time. I can tell you we're currently working at also in New Mexico at the University of New Mexico on the Innovate ABQ plan update, which is kind of like what they're doing at UC Riverside or did at University of Florida Innovation Square, where it's the major urban spine between the university and downtown. And our 2013 plan was all built around providing a development framework and flexibility for accommodating conditions that shift over time. So the work we're doing now is focusing on, hey, what's been built, you know, in the last several years, and how do we refocus on the mobility infrastructure that's been put in place that reshapes how we think about parking, how we think about adaptive use of some of the existing buildings that we have here and accommodate the buildings that already have been built, and how we also think about open space as it relates to the extraordinary demand that we've kind of seen. I was just reading an article this morning in Outside Magazine that were saying like, hey, we've all gotten used to eating outside and we like it. It's healthier, it's nicer. Like, how do we start planning more outside spaces? And then, you know, the last thing we talked about was, you know, opportunities to repurpose underutilized space, and if so, what kind of uses? We've seen a lot of these stakeholders in our group from the Rockies were really focusing on a lot of new build, but I think both in New Mexico, they've had some kind of shifting around. They're trying to do a new 20,000 square foot building that will have a lot of their facilities in it, and then some growth space that's more on the office kind of side, and looking at repurposing some of those buildings. I think there's been some of that repurposing at Illinois that was shared by Laura and Jonathan. One of their first project, actually the first project in that master plan was an adaptive reuse to kind of create a focused development location for some of these flexible laboratory spaces on campus. And so there are a couple of areas for reuse, I think, that are opportunistic, and anything I left out from others in the group here.
Okay. Thanks, Stephen. And we're going to roll right into Diamondbacks.
Well, the Diamondbacks had a really bad leader because he didn't have the questions. So we decided we'd talk about a couple of things. We spent most of our time talking about small labs and both the need, the opportunity, and the challenges for them. I think, you know, everybody, we had a wide variety of participants who have had various experience, and Mary Morris probably in terms of the biopark in Maryland has, you know, probably the longest and broadest depth, and she came back with the conclusion that, you know, there's still going to be need for more space because sometimes people don't leave and they just grow in place, and that means we're going to have to continue to add additional small labs for the next gens and so forth. There was a lot of conversation about you know, the smaller the space, the better to start with people, but then you got to have graduation space for them to move into so that you can keep building the ecosystem from the smallest to the next level of success, to then companies who grow to be, you know, go public and do other things and still stay in the park. So I don't know that we had a lot of specific plan that would make that happen everywhere, but I think it's kind of like a snowflake in each market because it has to deal with what the economic development opportunity is there for support. And Tom Flynn was saying that in his world, that's what they do, is they try and figure out ways to help people start these so that they can really contribute to the long-term success. The other discussion we had briefly was more just because I wanted some more input and feedback on on these community benefits and what has to come. And Laura from the University of Illinois, it was really interesting because it's not a big deal in Champaign because it's recognized that what the park is bringing is economic development, and that's good enough. And yet in places like Baltimore, it's not good enough. And needs to be they're focused on how do we get the youth involved from all the way up through the community college so that they can train for jobs that are actually being created there that don't need the 4-year college degree. So I think we had a good, robust conversation. We didn't answer the questions that I was just defined to ask, though.
No worries, all good.
I just
and we're
wanted
gonna
to add, can I add something real quick to that? I just wanted to say our focus hasn't been on youth where it has been on others. It's really on workforce development. So actually we have a very robust program of retraining adults, grown-ups who might be able to take our jobs in our tech community. So just a little bit different, whereas many of the other presentations were focused on STEM outreach to underprivileged communities.
Got it. Okay, well, we're bumping up against time here, but we're gonna maybe have the Braves go next.
Great, thanks, Will. So jumping to the mighty Braves in Atlanta. We'll go quickly so we can keep everybody moving. First question was, what steps have you taken to reactivate your campus and increase engagement among your stakeholders? A lot of responses, drive-by events, doing socially distanced gatherings, a lot of interesting ways to use digital media and communications, kind of rethinking how we use our strategies for engagement when we're challenged with not being able to meet in person. Kate had some really interesting ideas around elevating those positive stories, so particularly when the pandemic was really of great concern, a lot of misinformation, missing information. They focused their outreach and activation and building relationships around things like that they could do that were positive, right? About making face masks for healthcare workers and making hand sanitizer and things like that just helped to bind the community together, even when we were not able to be in person. So I think those types of activities and things that we've learned about how to communicate effectively, given distance and geography and work from home and things like that, will continue to inform our path forward as research parks, as innovation districts, universities. Second question, how are you addressing non-research and innovation uses? Things like affordable housing, workforce housing, hotels, community centers. And, there's a mix there. Steve had some interesting comments about, we're a smaller park. We don't necessarily have the acreage or the interest in having residential in our development. And we're looking more towards the market to meet that demand, as opposed to us positioning ourselves specifically to meet that demand. And I think that's a bit of the internal conversation based on your geography, your market opportunity that's been defined, and then defining for yourself with your board leadership or state institution partners of what role the research park could or should play in that as a catalyst, as a solution, as an advocate for these different uses in your community to diversify the different sources and amenities beyond research, education, and innovation that you have. So I thought that was a really interesting insight. And then others where it is very intentional, right? Affordability in Sacramento and where Mark is leading, and with Jonathan and Salt Lake, that's something that's front of mind, and there's a space and a vision and an interest for the research park to step into that area and to not be just a catalyst, but a solution to it. And I think that also is equally interesting. Last question was, what challenges are you facing around campus expansion or new building development? How are you addressing these challenges? Interestingly, a number of folks have buildings underway that were either planned pre-pandemic, were in construction, or wrapping up. So, while financing has probably had some complications depending on, is it based on the credit of the institution? Is it based on a partnership with somebody like we heard with Wexford and what Doug shared? I think the financing has had some nuance to it, but generally speaking, it was a pretty positive perspective as far as development goes. And a lot of interest in these smaller not co-working, but the conversation we had earlier around smaller component lab spaces, office spaces that create that flexibility for partners to come in, for the university to engage, being in high demand and something that we would project going forward. And Kate, of course, had to mention that construction and cost around parking is always a concern for them, going from surface parking to decks, and what does a densification of a site look like, and how do we afford to do that? So a couple quick takeaways. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. And then we're gonna move pretty quickly because we're up on time. I know people have hard stops, but we'll keep rolling as long as folks are around. And so we're gonna go with Team Dodgers next.
World champion Dodgers, please, Will. Well, I'll go quick. We had a small group and we actually talked about the questions at lunch. A couple themes that were a little different than what I've heard so far is, what's happening right now is some of the smaller leases have lapsed, and yet there's some bigger companies coming along. But competition seems like it's getting bigger. Competition with other developers, but also with cities that are also trying to figure out how to do this. And the interesting thing is the biggest challenge seems to be, how do you make these places into 24/7 communities? And how do you define the engine that's going to feed the economic development? What's the innovation hub? What's the story behind it? How's it going to work? And one of the interesting things that kind of came out of that was this idea of, for these spaces that you have that are becoming vacant, partnering with cities or nonprofits to create opportunities to share ownership and operational demands to help drive this kind of 24/7 community resource. And so while the tenancies are down, the opportunities to build communities where there probably weren't existing before are actually really interesting. And the last thing I thought was really great was this idea that the demographics inside the parks should look like the demographics of the community outside. And so how do you do these partnerships to make that happen? I mean, the rest of the Dodger group can weigh in if they want.
Anybody else from the Dodgers want to weigh in? If not, we will go to Team Nationals.
All right, this is Jordan Peterson from Tough. I'll try to beat the clock here. I think a lot of our conversations sort of came back to one or two topics. Does our current strategy meet the future needs of the community? There was a lot of energy around this concept of bumpability space, but talk that space needs intentional programming to be active and vibrant. And just planning that type of space into a park that was either built in an era where vehicle travel was the norm, or is built in a geography where vehicle travel is still the norm, can make it even more challenging to make those places vibrant. But certainly planning outside events has been part of the solution for a lot of places. And that's events that are aimed not only at engaging people who are inside the park, but also people in the broader community. So maybe those are seasonal or holiday events, just to add a sense of vibrancy to the park. There was a lot of conversation about how those are paid for, charged back to tenants through CAM charges, including in operating expenses. And that a couple of our folks reported that a high percentage of their tenants have seen lots of value in the cost of that program. So new parks seem to be planned with space for community engagement. And it was mentioned that housing also plays a role in that. So bringing people into the park who don't necessarily work there adds that sense of vibrancy as well. So lots of interest in ways to program those spaces. And among other topics, those were the biggest ones we discussed.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan.
We also discussed GMP facilities briefly, because that's of interest to Stan from San Diego State was interested in that. So we had a good conversation about the cost and the needs for certified good manufacturing practice facilities.
And the recognition that those need to be kept current because those standards are ever changing. And so that's not a one-time certification and you're done.
Okay. Awesome. Anybody else? If not, we will jump to the Phillies.
Great, thanks. Just a couple of quick observations. Affordable housing was an element in Montgomery County. There is none, and we don't know if we can add it. So just a real challenge on quote affordable housing in these in certain communities where we're trying to build parks. No real solutions there. The tension, Joel Swift was on the line, talked about Aggie Square, mentioned the CBA. I mean, that must have been some virtual party you guys had after that got signed. I mean, that must have been a 7-month slog in order to create the agreement where you had the tension of the neighbors who were there a long time and were afraid of getting crowded out of their houses, and how you support that. And then one other element about campus expansion is the length of time and just in time, where people are going to come out of this pandemic and want new facilities right away. Our ability to deliver new buildings and new spaces is marked in years, and tenants these days want it in months. So just another tension that's out there.
Awesome. Anybody else from the Phillies have anything to add? If not, we will jump to the Angels.
Well, thank you. I'll keep it really brief. On two of the questions, one was addressing the non-research and innovation uses, the affordable housing, workforce housing, things like that. One of the general things that I've learned with Aggie Square is that, you know, it's not for an innovation district to solve the problems of the community, but to work with the community and the city and others to, take a stock or inventory of the resources in the area as far as housing or retail spaces, community spaces, and work together with the city and others from the beginning. What we did with ours with that EIFD and the CBPA is, creating the housing, affordable housing fund, basically over $50 million that's outside of our project, which is pretty impactful. And the workforce, housing, it goes along with the workforce training. So it's upskilling those in the community to help them get jobs within the innovation district or in the region. And leveraging the hotels that we have in the area and making sure they can support the resources that are needed for the innovation districts. And again, what challenges are you facing around campus expansion and new buildings? In California, it seems any major project is subject to CEQA lawsuits from community groups and others. What was nice with ours is that we made sure the community was involved in the planning of it, and also having community sessions or meetings, and really working closely with the city from day one before it was really a project on pulling together our priorities, both from the university and from the city and others, which was huge, and providing resources like Doug and Ted mentioned earlier, within, in our case, Aggie Square, that's accessible by the community and of use to the community. I don't know if Charlie or Chris had any other comments.
Okay. Well, nice job multitasking there, Mark.
Sorry. Yeah.
I think we're pretty much done. We have one more, the Orioles, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. Well, great, guys. This is gonna be really short. We were halfway through our time before I knew I was the leader. Oops. So we discussed something totally different, which was absolutely valuable to us, but I'm probably going to share that at a different. We discussed activation and data collection and the importance of drilling down on that. And we will enlighten the group at a later time about that conversation. And that's the honest thing of it. We didn't have the questions, and that's what we discussed. And I enjoyed being with all those folks.
Good, as long as the interaction was good. So that's all we have for today. So thank you to the panelists and to the facilitators, as well as all of the participants. Thank you to the AURP staff, Brian, Vicky, and Diana. And then also thanks again to the Wexford team for sponsoring lunch. you should have received a link in the chat, but I think you might receive an email as well for survey. We'd like to hear your feedback as to what you like, what you didn't like, what we can be doing, what we could have done better. So please fill that out at your convenience. And then also want to remind everybody of the half marathon. So get your stats in. And then the next week's module, second module is April 15th, and it's going to be on smart city technology. And I believe Mark is hosting that panel, if I'm not mistaken. So that's going to be a good one. And we hope to see you all next week as well. And I think that's all we have. So thanks again, everyone, for joining.